Well, a warm welcome to this talk. Now, something different today I want to think about. Something I've been thinking about for the past few months, and I kind of feel like I know so many of you now, even though, of course, I don't personally, but I just wanted to share my thinking on this. It's about the Shroud of Turin, which is a shroud in the Cathedral of Turin in Italy. And this is so fascinating, and I've been looking at it for a few months now. It's an overlap between science, pathology, medicine, all aspects of science with history, and it's the image of a crucified man. Let me just show you it here. This is from the shroud.com site. Now this is one of the definitive sites on the shroud, in fact probably the definitive site on the shroud. You can see that the cloth has been damaged, it was burnt in a fire, but we'll also see the image of this man of the shroud on it. It's about 14 feet long, this artifact. Now, it is completely fascinating. If you haven't got time to watch this video, I think the evidence for this being the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself is quite convincing. But, of course, I don't tell you what to think. You'll have to look at it for yourself. Why don't more people know about this? Well, John Calvin here, he was a Protestant theologian of the past, and he wrote this book saying that the shroud particularly was a forgery, and he was quite influential in the Protestant world, and the secular world isn't particularly interested in it. So while this has got some traction in the Catholic world, very little traction in the Protestant world, which is a great pity. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, a lot of these relics, so-called, were just a part of a medieval racket. Of course, it was a making money thing, like selling indulgences. But there does seem to be some genuine relics as well, and the shroud seems to be one of those. Now, here's the picture that you actually see if you look at the shroud itself. This is taken from the 1978 exploration scientific investigation, and this is from the photographer Vernon Miller, available on shroudphotos.com. And this is what you actually see on the shroud, and it's a photo negative. So already I think we can probably see the head, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the moustache, the beard, marks, blood stains. These are being confirmed to be human blood on various parts from what would be we would assume to be the crown of thorns, the scourge marks that are on many parts of the body. And this is what we actually see when you look at the shroud itself. But it turns out that this is a photo negative on an original linen cloth. But the point is, linen is not a photosensitive material, and it's a negative. And of course, it's centuries before photography was developed. Photography only starts, I don't know, about 1830s or something like that. Way before that. And yet we have this photographic negative here on the shroud. Now, it wasn't known, of course, this was a negative until photography was developed. So when photography was developed, the first guy to photograph this as a positive was Seconde Pierre, French photographer, 1898, and he saw that this was, so he took a picture of the negative, and then it became a positive, and he was the first person to see it as a positive. And you can see a lot more features in the positive light. So we have this mystery already of how do we get this photo negative image on a shroud centuries before photography was even thought about, and the image is on a non-photographic sensitive material. So already it becomes really quite intriguing as to what this artifact is and who the man on the shroud is. So that's that picture there. Now, if we look at again, if we compare this is why it gets really interesting. We compare this with ancient prophecies and ancient scriptures. So this is the prophecy of Isaiah. Just as there are many who were appalled at him, his appearance was disfigured beyond that of any human being. His form was marred beyond human likeness. So what we have to remember is this is a picture of death. The man on the shroud is dead. He's in rigor mortis and is badly beaten up. That's completely unequivocal. So much pathology attests to this, some of which we'll look at. So this is an image in death is perhaps the key thing to remember, but it is consistent with ancient writings. Now, not only is there an image on the shroud, the image is actually codes three-dimensional information. Now, in other words, the grayscale on the image contains three-dimensional information. Now, if you take a picture of yourself and put it under what's called a 3D image analyzer, it'll just be a complete mess. But when you do that with a shroud, it comes to life. And this was first done again in 1978. Now, this was done using what's called a VP8 image analyzer. It takes the original one took 8 scales of grey and transformed that into three-dimensional information. Now, this was actually developed by NASA and NASA-associated scientists to look at planets, to work out what craters went down and what hills went up, to give three-dimensional topographical information from astronomical photographs. But when they put the shroud image under that, quite a bright idea to do that, quite incredibly, it was seen to have three-dimensional information, and you get this face emerging, the face of the dead man of the shroud here emerging. And likewise, all parts of the body have this three-dimensional data on it. And again, quite unique. So there's things here which are completely unique. The image on a non-photographic material, the linen cloth, that actually encodes three-dimensional information. So the intrigue only grows as we learn more about it. But let's go on. That's the three-dimensional coded information. There's another one there, another one generated. I think that's generated by a more recent image generator. But that three-dimensional information is all encoded in the grayscale of the original image. It's all encoded there. So the information in that picture there is all coded for in the original picture that I showed you here, in negative and in positive there. So we have the strange coding of three-dimensional information, and the face of the man of the shroud starts to become recognizable, well, clearly recognizable as a human face. Now, the linen cloths again are attested to in the New Testament. This is Joseph of Arimathea, took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. That's in the Gospel. So this linen cloth, and as we'll see, the headcloth as well, is clearly mentioned in the ancient scriptural texts. And again, you've got this fascinating tie-up between the current science and the ancient or the New Testament documentation. It really becomes quite an intriguing object to start to study. I stress I am by no means an expert. I'm merely sharing my current thinking, which is immensely limited, but I just felt I wanted to share my thinking. So the cloth is, the body was wrapped in it longitudinally. So here we see the frontal image, and then the cloth was wrapped over the top of the body, and this is the back of the image. So again, here we clearly see the marks from the blood marks from the crown of thorns. The blood has been tested. It is human blood. And we see the scourge marks on the front, and we see the scourge marks, the excessive scourge marks. These big artifacts here are from the fire. So it was back, I can't remember the precise date. I've got it written down later on, 1590 or something, there was a fire. So those marks there, but fortunately the shroud was rescued. And interesting to note, the image itself, we don't know if the image has become dimmer as a result of the fire, but the image is still clearly discernible with all the encoded negative and three-dimensional information is all still there, clearly visible, despite the fire marks on the linen cloth. Here we see the frontal image. Here we're looking at the negative. So this is what you actually see when you look at the shroud. We see the negative image, and here we see the positive image. What we're looking at here, now it's actually a very difficult topic to study this, because whoever this man on the shroud is, It's definitely a human being on the shroud. It's anatomically perfect. His suffering is beyond imagining. So what we actually see here is we see the scourge marks on the front, going on down onto the legs. We see the scourge marks there in positive on the legs, on the chest, and on the arms, and we actually see the marks here of the nail of crucifixion. We see 4 fingers here. These are blood marks on the arms, and these blood marks are consistent with the body being in a crucifixion position. The pathology here does add up in really quite alarming ways, really. Roman crucifixion was not through the palm of the hand, it was through the wrist. It's hard to think about, but the nail would go through the median nerve. That causes retraction of the thumb. That's why you only see the fingers. Of course, the median nerve is motor and sensory. The suffering that this would generate is completely beyond comprehension. But we see it clearly in the image there, consistent with the Roman practices, and many reconstructions have demonstrated this as well, carried out by innumerable surgeons and pathologists. The shroud is actually the most studied archaeological artifact on the planet. It's just amazing that more people haven't heard about it. Now, so that's the negative, that's the positive of the front. The legs, the lower part of the legs, again, we see the folded arms. The victim is, of course, naked. Crucifixion, Roman crucifixion, would have been carried out. The humiliation of the victim was part of the process, whatever you want to call it. Victims would be crucified naked. Here we see the folded hands here, the legs with the scourge marks on the legs. The whole body is scourged with a Roman whip. And we see it there in positive as well. We do see the burn marks from the fire. Again, we see the strips of linen attested to in the scriptures. This one's from Luke's Gospel. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying there by themselves, went away. Some people say, well, there's strips. Why have we only got one strip? There would be other bits that tied the shroud together. And we'll see later there's also a headpiece which has been identified as well. Here we see a bit more detail. These are all from shroudpictures.com. This is the negative from the back. This is the crown of thorns. These are the blood stains, the human blood, in negative and in positive. And again, we see the scourge marks, and we also see bruising on the shoulder blades, which we'll see what that's about in a minute. So high definition pictures available for free download, thankfully, for the photographers who made it freely available. Here we see the full body image in positive. We see the whole body. It's of a young, fit, very physically fit man in very good shape. Young man in good shape. We see it from the front with the scourge marks, and we see it from the back, marks from the crown of thorn, the scourge marks that go down over the buttocks, down onto the legs in high contrast negative. I think what the photographers there has actually beefed up the contrast a bit, so it's easier to see, but all this information is genuinely there. And as I say, these photos go back to 1978, so we're in a pre-digital age here, but they are professional quality pictures. Now, from the image on the shroud, we see that the man of the shroud has a broken nose, a swollen face. Part of the beard has been plucked out, tearing wounds produced by the scourging. Wounds from the crown of thorns, bruises on the shoulder, which we believe, if this is indeed Jesus of Nazareth, from carrying the weight of a cross, again it's consistent. Knee injuries from repeated falls, nail wounds from Roman crucifixion, and an oval wound between the 5th and the 6th rib on the right hand side. And again, these are the wounds that have been known about from the sufferings of Christ himself. Let's just look at these briefly. So if we take those features there that have been completely demonstrated from the shroud, the broken nose, swollen face. So example, Matthew says they spat on him, they took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. So clear evidence of a head trauma in the ancient New Testament scriptures. Part of the beard plucked out is not mentioned in the New Testament, but it is a prophecy in Isaiah. So we're kind of seeing this long-term historical consistency. Part of the beard pulled out there from the prophecy in Isaiah. Tearing wounds produced by the scourging. This is Pilate had Jesus flogged, so we know that the scourging took place in the gospel accounts. Crown of thorns is clearly attested to again in several scriptures. Bruises on the shoulder. John's gospel says Jesus carried his own cross to begin with, went to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. So he started off carrying the cross, or probably the cross member of the cross rather than the whole cross. And the bruises on the shoulder are there as he would struggle with the weight of that large wooden beam. The injuries have been clearly identified again by the surgeons and pathologists who've examined the image on the shroud. Knee injuries from repeated falls. The Gospels don't talk about this directly, but they do say that so Jesus looked like he started carrying the cross himself, and then someone else carried it for him. A man called Simon of Cyrene had to carry it for him, presumably because of the repeated falls. Although that's putting two and two together, it probably does make four though. So help in carrying the cross. Wounds on the right side. When they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. So it's too horrendous to think about. The Jewish Sabbath, the Passover Sabbath actually, was coming up, and the Jews didn't want people on the cross during that period of time. So what would happen is the Roman authorities would break the legs of the victims. Now, to breathe in the crucifixion position, you can only do so by pushing up through your feet, otherwise you can't breathe out. So if you broke the legs of the victim, the legs would be biomechanically inactive. The victim would no longer be able to push up to be able to breathe, and they would asphyxiate, which I assume would be considered a merciful thing to do. It's quite horrendous beyond description. But with Jesus, they didn't. He had this wound in his side. Now, the wound in his side does seem to be consistent with Roman military training, that to kill people, it's a way that the Romans inflicted a wound. It would go from the right side through to the heart, and there's evidence that did in fact happen from the pulmonary edema and the pleural fluid that came out. That's when it talks about water and blood coming out from the wound. Again, completely consistent with the pathology as a result of the trauma that had been torture that had been inflicted. So it looks like a standard Roman wound. Military have this. If you want to, I talked to someone who was in British Special Forces or whatever, some rum group in the army, and they're taught specific ways to kill people. Simple as that. So this appears to be a standard Roman way to make sure that someone was dead. Wound in the right side. Again, it is clearly there on the shroud. Now, the linen cloth itself is interesting, of course. Let's look at that somewhat now as well. This is a 35mm colour transparency, 32 times magnification, and this is the weave. So the plain shroud cloth where there is no blood or image. So this is the shroud photographed from the 1978 team. And this is an area of the shroud from the nose, actually. The yellow fibres are the building block of the image. So we can see here that there's these fibres. Now, this is the big linen fibre, and this is the smaller fibrils or whatever that make it up. And this darker bit, so if we just look back, so that's what it looked like without the image. That's an area without the image. And this is an area with the image. And the image is just this very superficial area, this decolored area on top, and it's very, very narrow. The yellowed fibers run only between they're a microburn between 250 nanometers. So this is very superficial. So 0.2 to 0.5 of a micrometer in thickness, the burning here. And of course, no one knows how this image was produced. I mean, a big part of the 1978, the STURP team, the Shroud of Turin research project team, was working out how this image was created, and they expected to go and look at it and find the paint marks from Leonardo da Vinci's brush or whatever and say, it's a painting there, forget it. And if that had been the case, that we would have forgotten it. But these markings here constitute a remarkably totally anatomically accurate image of this young man, of the shroud, with the clear pathological evidence of the torture and the execution that was used, and it's just marked by these very superficial this very superficial image, and no one knows how this image got there. Now, people do talk about it. It does appear to be some kind of the main theory is it's some kind of radiation effect. There was an episode of radiation exposure that was very intense, but very, very short. And of course, there's been thousands, millions of shrouds in our history, but this is the only one with an image on it. I'm afraid I've seen a lot of shrouds, and you don't see images on it. I did see an image, a death image once. A patient had died, and the bile had leaked out of a wound, and they had the hand underneath them, between themselves and the mattress, and the bile had left like this perfect handprint. It was really quite eerie, perfect handprint in bile, but that was just the handprint, just in bile on the mattress. It was really quite strange to see. But that's the only thing I've seen in my entire career, and of course, you know, there is no whole body images. This is a unique, completely unique image, and this is how it's generated. Remarkably thin, superficial burning. So 0.2 to 0.5 of a micrometer, and of course there's 1,000 micrometers in a millimeter, and yeah, you know how big a millimeter is. So if you follow one of these fibers until it dips below the next thread, then that fiber becomes white. In other words, it's just the superficial fibers that would have been facing the body that have been burnt or discoloured in this way. No explanation. Many people have tried to duplicate the image and with modern technology and failed to do so. So the idea that this could be a forgery using medieval technology is not really a conscionable theory, because we can't duplicate it now with clever laser beams and all that kind of stuff. That a medieval forger or earlier forger could have done this is not really a credible. I don't see that as a credible view. That's why I lean strongly towards this being a genuine artifact. Now, this is an area on the chest wound where there's blood. So it's yellowed from the serum. So as you know, blood is red cells in serum, and this has got human serum in it, like a halo effect. So there's the red blood cells, and then there's the halo effect of the serum round about it, as you get with any blood spillage, in fact. So the red rust-coloured blood. So the blood is still somewhat red, and the reason that the blood is still somewhat red appears to be because it's very high in bilirubin, a pigment that will stay red, in this case presumably for 2,000 years. As a result of the trauma, there would be breakup of red blood cells. So the blood of the traumatized person of the shroud would have been remained red, whereas ordinary blood would fade, because of the history of the torture and trauma. The blood is positive for hemoglobin and human albumin, so definitely human blood. Something called S-positive antigens only occur in human blood, and I haven't worked this out entirely, but some workers seem pretty confident the blood group is AB. but I don't know enough to comment on that at the moment. You know, the shroud is like an Encyclopedia Britannica, and I've just opened the dust cover. Really, there's so much to it, but I'm just giving enough to make it. Hopefully that you find this, well, I don't know. Interesting seems a bit of a inadequate word. Anyway, so definitely human blood. We can be definitive about that on the shroud. Now, we mentioned before that the shroud contains three-dimensional information from the front and from the back. So what people have done in recent years is they've taken that three-dimensional information and they've used that to generate I think, I'm not sure, it might actually be a 3D printout, but they certainly generated a whole body, a statue from that, based entirely on the three-dimensional information on the shroud itself. And this is what we get from that. So we know that the spatial data eliminates photography and painting. And the posture is that of the deceased in rigor mortis. So this body is in rigor mortis. It has the stiffness of death. It's in rigor mortis. And why is it in this position? Well, it was taken from the crucifixion position. So the arms have been moved down. But we can see that the weight of the body would be slumped on the legs. So the legs are bent, slumped on the bottom nail. And we can see that the head would be hanging down because the body was dead. And the head, it almost looks like it's got a pillow propped underneath it. Not at all. It's because the head was hanging down and the body went stiff while it was still on the cross. And we get this, this position, again, all encoded for by the three-dimensional information on the shroud, and all completely anatomically, pathologically, albeit horrifically beyond description, accurate. And we see the scourge marks on the body, more of which later on. So that is the three-dimensional reconstruction based on the three-dimensional data on the shroud, encoded in the shroud. Now, a lot of this information came from this study here. This is the Shroud of Turin research project in 1978, when they had a lot of access. There's a group of scientists, leading scientists from around the world. There has been quite a bit of science done since then, but that was the last time there was large-scale access. So I really hope the Catholic Church decides to allow more access, because there's so many scientific experiments that we know about now that could be done non-destructively without damaging the cloth. So this big study in 78. So no pigments, dyes or stains have been found on the fibrils. So it's not a painting. X-ray fluorescence and microchemistry on the fibrils precludes the possibility of paint being used as a method for creating the image. So we know it's not a painted image. Ultraviolet and infrared evaluation confirms these studies. Computer images enhance the analysis. By a device known as the VPA image analyzer shows that the image has a unique three-dimensional information encoded in it. Microchemical evaluation has indicated no evidence of any spices, oils or biochemicals known to be produced by the body in life or in death. So they're saying that they're fairly confident the image does not come from things that were done to the body or things that happened to the body after death. It is clear there's been direct contact of the shroud with a body. So whoever body this was is definitely a real body. This type of contact might explain some of the features of the torso. It is totally incapable of explaining the image of the face, with the high resolution that has been amply demonstrated by photography. So again, they're basically saying that this can't be explained by these things have been postulated as the way the image got there. Experiments in physics and chemistry with old linen have failed to reproduce adequately the phenomena represented by the Shroud of Turin, and this is still true today. No one's been able to duplicate the way that this image is generated, even now in 2024. There are no chemical or physical methods known which can account for the totality of the image, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. And that remains true today. This image is a total enigma. It appears to be produced by a very short flash of high intensity light radiation. Or if there was another way it was produced, it still hasn't been elucidated and can't be replicated today, which of course is part of the allure of the shroud. Just how did this image get there? Thus the answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains, now as in the past, a mystery. We don't know. And then a quick summary of the Stirp's conclusions. We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. So whoever this man was, he did definitely suffer these anatomically accurate, pathologically correct torture procedures. It is not the product of an artist, so they're able to exclude that. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin, that's human albumin. And they conclude the image is an ongoing mystery. The problem remains unsolved. How the image got there. But of course, you're now going to say that this whole thing has been disproved by radiocarbon dating. So in 1988, this study came out, and this team of scientists from around the world who were able to obtain some of the cloth said that this was generated in 1260, between 1260 and 1390. Now, it's not quite as clear-cut as that, because a lot of the information from this only arose from Freedom of Information requests decades later. But carbon dating is a highly accurate methodology, so I am convinced that the sample that they took from the top left-hand corner of the shroud did in fact give this carbon date. So that is accurate science. From 1988, given the sample that they were given, this is accurately the carbon-14 dating, and it's a highly reliable method of dating. But further studies have shown that this part of the cloth that was analysed, as well as containing linen, which is throughout the shroud, apparently it also it does actually contain some cotton as well, which was not part of the original shroud. So what it looks like, and looking at this this part of the shroud again, it looks like it's been repaired with more modern materials, probably in the medieval period, and this has been studied really very extensively. So it looks like they just picked a bit of a bad bit to study, even though they gave it to 3 universities. It was very close bits. But within the bits that they took for the universities, there was separation of a couple of hundred years in the bits that they took. So what seems to have happened is there's been a repair, and they've also found there was some more modern resin over this, which was plant-based resin, so it's carbon-based. So the date that we have here, this radiocarbon date, while accurate, actually seems to represent an average of the original older material from presumably from the 1st century, with the modern material probably from about the 1500s, that gives this date as an average for the amount of material there. But there was quite a lot of heterogeneity within the different samples. And this paper here, I mean, there's you can't go into this in that much detail. You know, some people do, but I've gone into it in some detail. But there's so many papers that now say that we can't rely on this. It doesn't say it's 1st century. It just says we can't rely on this this sample. So this paper here, for example, peer-reviewed journal, studies on the radiocarbon sample from the shroud. The radiocarbon sample area is uniquely coated with a yellow-brown plant gum containing dye lakes. Now this would be much later material. Pyrolysis, that is heating to basically turn it to gasification. Mass spectrometry results from the sample area coupled with the microscopic and microchemical observations prove that the radiocarbon sample was not part of the original cloth of the Shroud of Turin. The radiocarbon date thus not valid for determining the age of the Shroud of Turin. Now, this doesn't tell us what the date is. It just tells us that the sample that was taken was badly selected. In fact, there's a bit of a strange story behind that I don't pretend to fully understand. I will be putting links if you want to pursue this. So while the carbon dating I believe to be completely accurate, I believe that actually looked at a combination of older and newer repair material and gave us an average date, which is exactly what carbon dating does. So that's consistent with that. And then there's also some newer studies. This one, for example, X-ray dating of, this is a new method. I don't pretend to understand it, of course. X-ray dating of a Turin shroud linen sample, inspecting fibre structure degraded by means of wide angle X-ray scattering. This experimental results, and this only came out. When did this come out? I think this is 2024. This is brand new stuff. The experimental results are compatible with the hypothesis that the Shroud of Turin is a 2,000-year-old relic. So the carbon dating can no longer be relied on because it contained a mixture of materials. Newer materials are consistent with this being genuinely dated to the time period. And my understanding is the nature of the material is as well. For example, similar dated material has come from Masada, Masada's in Israel as well. It's famous for that siege where the Romans sieged the Jewish population, probably around about AD 70. I'm not, historians, please forgive me, around about that time. It does seem consistent with that. And this method does give... Now, I'm not saying this method's definitive, not by any means. It does rely on quite a few assumptions being made. But it's not inconsistent with the first century date. But even if it wasn't a first century date, we've still got to explain what we've seen. But carbon dating no longer be relied on. Other methods show this is consistent with a first century date to the time of Christ. The pathology. I've mentioned some of this as we've gone along. For example, the Roman flagrum, 3 thongs with twin balls of metal, two scourges. There was 2 people carried out the. People have done what you call arc studies. There was a scourger on each side of the torture victim, and using these excessive violence of these Roman flagrums. Now, the definitive text on this was written by a French doctor, Pierre Barbet. He was a military doctor, a military surgeon, and that was the first book. A bit dated now, but it's been updated since. But Robert Bucklin, the Forsnick pathologist who's done a lot of work on this, he said this: the markings on this image are so clear and medically accurate that the pathological facts which they reflect concerning the suffering and death of the man depicted here, in my opinion, beyond dispute. So again, a whole range of studies written about that. And to my limited understanding of trauma, it is all disturbingly accurate. I see no pathological medical inconsistency whatsoever in the material I have looked at. But much cleverer, better people than me have looked at it, and that is their conclusion. This chap, for example, Robert Bucklin. He was I think he might have died just recently, maybe just this year or last year. But again, he was a lifelong forensic pathologist. That's what he did, and that was his conclusion. But many hundreds of others have agreed with this as well. Just a few more things that are interesting. The shroud contains Jerusalem dirt found on the soles of the feet, the left knee from where he fell over, and the nose. So alarmingly to think that as Jesus was carrying the cross, he fell over and his nose would hit the ground. There's dirt. The 78 team took sticky tape samples and found dirt. dirt of the feet found underneath the bloodstains, interestingly. So the dirt came first and then the bloodstains came after. Limestone calcium carbonate crystals consistent with local samples, and there's a lot of other mineralogy I've heard of that I don't pretend to understand, but it is completely consistent with the mineralogy that occurs in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. And again, there's books that talk about this in great detail. Pollen is another fascinating one. So the shroud contains pollen from Jerusalem, North and South Turkey, France and Italy. And this is consistent with the known history of the shroud and history of the shroud that has been pieced together as well by eminent historians. We'll see an example of that in a minute. I'm not going to go into the pollen. I'm not a botanist, but this is just one example here. So there's a lot of pollen from Gundelii, Tourneforti. Apologies to botanists, but this is this plant here, and its pollen has been found, and it flowers in the Jerusalem area February to May, which of course is the time of the Jewish Passover, and the death of Jesus was at the time of the Jewish Passover. Which begins the 15th day of Nisan, which is the 26th of March to the 25th of April. So again, many types of pollen. Botanists have studied this in detail. Books have been written about the pollen. And again, there's a consistent pollen trail for the history of the shroud, correctly identifying the geographical areas, sometimes really quite, sometimes quite precisely, in fact. The history of the shroud has been looked at as well extensively. This book, for example, Ian Wilson, I think is an Oxford academic. So, for example, Sermon of Athanasius in 68 AD, image of our Lord and Saviour at full length. He described about that arriving. There's something called the image of Edessa in 221. And then the shroud seems to have gone quiet for a few hundred years. Some historians think it was hidden in a wall, I think in Edessa for a period of time, and then it came out again. And interestingly, when it came out about the year 600, 650, that's the time when iconography changed. So the pictures of Christ changed to being consistent with the shroud rather than the more Romanesque icons that have been generated in the sort of 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s before the shroud came out again. Again, not definitive, but very interesting. And then it ended up in 1354 in Leary. Now, I'm pretty sure that the provenance is pretty, well, it's historically definitely accurate from 1354. This is the pilgrimage badge that people got from seeing the shroud, and you can see the image of the shroud there from when this was a medieval pilgrimage. So pretty definitive history from 1354, but likely history before that. And I've actually ordered this book, but I haven't read it yet. So it's just so interesting. We've got like the pathology, the medicine, the physiology, the photography, the botany, the geology, the mineralogy, the history, all come together to form a consistent whole, which is why this the historical documentation all coming together to form a very consistent story about this Shroud of Turin, as we now call it. And I assume sometime after that it went to Turin. I'm not quite sure when. But in 1354 it was in Leary in France. Now that's basically all I want to say about the shroud. As I say, this is just me thinking out loud, really, giving some super information. There's another cloth called the Sudarium of Oviedo in Spain. That's got a fairly definite provenance going back to some say 616 AD, others say 770, but it's been documented for some period of time. Now it's postulated or believed that this is the headcloth that wrapped the body of Jesus after crucifixion. This would have gone on top of the shroud, and this is in Spain. And again, this has been extensively studied, although not as extensively as the shroud itself. But it is completely consistent with these bloodstones. No image, of course, because the image was very superficial, and this would be over the top of the shroud. And again, consistent with the New Testament. Simon Peter came along behind him went straight into the tomb. This is talking about the time of the resurrection. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, so that could well be this cloth again. Can't be definitive about that, but it looks consistent. It's got the sudarium, the head covering, has got Jerusalem dirt. Chemical signature close correlates with dirt samples from the Calvary site in Jerusalem. Dirt on the nose again, consistent with the shroud. 120 bloodstains coincide with the facial area of the Shroud of Turin. People have mapped this in incredible detail, and they are consistent. Now, the thing about this, as we've said, is that the documentation goes way back. So I think it's been in the same place since 1075, and other scholars say that the definite provenance of this goes back to 616. So if the blood markings here are the same as the shroud, that to me that means the shroud must be at least this old as well. It doesn't tell us how old, but it does indicate that it's older than 616 AD. So a lot of things do fit together on this. The provenance there certainly back to 1075, and as we've said before that. But no, I think maybe it's been in a Oviedo Cathedral consistently since 1075. So that was my whistle-top review of the Shroud of Turin that I've been looking at so far. I just felt I wanted to share that with you. Make what you will of it. I'm going to put a lot of links down. Anyone wants to follow it up. A truly fascinating document. And I don't know. I do feel that the way the world is going at the moment, there's a lot of things aren't looking very hopeful at the moment, and it's almost like that this is a message for later times, that while the shroud could be appreciated in earlier centuries, no one knew it was a photographic negative until photography was invented. No one knew it had three-dimensional information until the people started wanting to interpret the topography of distant planets, and so many other things that science is revealing about this quite extraordinary artifact. I'll leave it there for now. Let me know your thoughts. If you're interested, I'm going to put links onto people who actually know what they're talking about. But that's what I've been looking at, and I wanted to share it with you. Because I really do feel like I'm just looking at a camera now, but I do feel like I'm looking at you. So it's very strange, very strange. There we are. For now, thank you.